For this video's introduction, I am going to go over function words, a rather deceptive portion of the CAE test, as while I am aware of them, understand them and their usage, can quite comfortably translate them to my own native language. But when suddenly confronted by, I firmly believe by is the correct one here, the absence of these function words in the open-close section of the test, it becomes slightly more difficult, sometimes a bit less apparent which one of them to use in that particular scenario, as even though context is usually provided, my brain seems to give me more than one option, and usually only one is the correct one. Hence, being absolutely sure which preposition to use, which article to use, or the lack of thereof, which conjunction to use in that particular case, the correct usage of modals, of auxiliary verbs, when to use who, where, what, which, and when to substitute that with that. However, the lines between these are not always that distinct. Sometimes the difference being one choice is considered by some to be a bit more formal, lacking any actual rules that would support such notions. Eventually, I will have to go through all of them, but I would say that modals deserve the most of my attention for now, simply to reaffirm the instinctual employment of these tools of the language. And as with the previous topic, linking words, it means reading proper English, written by proper British authors, word by word, focusing on the structure, on actual comprehension, instead of purely consuming it for the story or the feelings in case of poetry, as well as going through the little rules there are for the utilization of certain aspects of function words so that I can avoid failing in that one example of that particular exercise when my intuition fails me or I fail to accurately listen to it and instead begin questioning and overthinking, which usually results in lost time and eventually points. In brief, this was truly just an overview, and I will further explore the individual segments of this problematic in future videos. Now I wanted to go back to the previous video's writing section, to the horses example. Their replacement within that setting, in my opinion, should not be just something that loosely fits into the story. It has to be a creature whose entire purpose is not merely to replace a horse from our world with an adequately named creature with exact same functions, just with a different name. No, it has to be unique and useful at the same time within that setting, serving some purpose other than just being a replacement for our world's living or inanimate vehicles. Something that obviously applies to everything else and puts even more strain onto my already feeble ability to write and imagine and use English to then put my ideas on paper, since the reader needs to learn about all of this through the characters of my story, through their interactions with these novelties, through their mannerism and so on, as if the character would go around the town pointing at different tools and buildings. We use this for that, and his companions, bewildered, would ask him who is he talking to, or she, as giving this explanation to an imaginary audience that also includes the characters' backstories and motivations. I need to strictly avoid them just spewing everything out on the first occasion they meet another character, but instead slowly in irregular doses at infrequent occasions drip them down onto the pages. I need to constantly remind myself that certain things can remain a mystery, and to fulfill my weird ideas, certain facts of that world should remain incomprehensible to me as an inhabitant of our real world, a concept that gives me both a leeway and shackles at the same time. Another thing, I should not use direct comparisons. Sour is fine. Sour as lemon is obviously not. Why would there be lemons in my fictional world? Sour enough to turn your boots inside out would be slightly more fitting. Meanwhile, the second option would exist solely for the reader, which is wrong because while the reader is only me and I don't care about me, I, the writer, should only care about the character who has no reason to even know what a lemon is, but probably has come into contact throughout his life up until that point with something edible or not that I could use instead, assuming I correctly introduce it to that world as one of its components. Anyway, to conclude this, I have a lot of thinking to do when my initial attempts will surely fail. As long as I can keep these quote unquote rules somewhere in the corner of my mind, hopefully I will end up with a story that will at least somewhat satisfy my strange demands. Right now, though, there are still a few more adventures for the Rapid Arrows to experience before I inevitably move on to the books. And the beginning of this particular short story sees us at the Brotherhood's hideout, where Bristles is currently either building or repairing one of his cages, one for his little rat friends. Longpole is sitting across from him, and their third member, Bohosh, just enters the door, elated and excited, as he begins with calling their names, and only then is he able to relay his message. The great news, carefully picked from the streets. Apparently, the fountain in the nearby square has had some new additions installed, namely fishes, and not just some fishes. According to Bohosh, these fishes are golden, and that has the entire Brotherhood scrambling as greed fills their hearts. They can barely speak human language, and the idea is to to somehow fish the fishes out of the water and then sell them to whoever might be interested. When they arrive at their destination, we see all of them gathered around the fountain, Longpole leaning over the edge, desperately trying to reach the elusive prey of his. Unfortunately for him, it is as if the fishes knew they were being targeted, keeping their distance, avoiding all attempts at being pulled out. Despite his quite impressive reach, the quick-witted Bohosh brings over a crate he had found somewhere, offering it to Longpole as a stepping stone of sorts, which will hopefully extend the other boy's reach and lead to a successful hunt. This all accompanied by the remarks of the new arrivals, our heroes, the Rapid Arrows, as they are wondering what could the Brotherhood possibly be doing around the fountain. However, as the boys are going down the stairs, it turns out that simply leaning the crate against the side of the object without securing it in any way, shape, or form can, and in this case will, lead to some accidents as the long pole's extension topples and sends the young man head first much closer to the fishes than I think he would have preferred. This time it is Speedy who takes charge of the situation as he sends the rest of the club to the rescue and he himself rushes over to Longpole's dad to inform him of the current development. The four remaining members of our titular club at the scene of the tragedy in making. As it turns out, Longpole may have missed his beaver of swimming and alongside Bubbles, some weird babbles are coming out. While that is happening, it is Speedy with his powerful voice who is currently informing the progenitor of one of their long-standing nemesis, who does not take the news lightly, as he calls out for his dearest, for his everything, that this transgression will cost him dearly, or dear here. I believe that the idiom has both forms, but I might be wrong. But I did find both the effort cost them dear, where dear is used as an adverb and then as dearly, so nevertheless, by that he meant his son is going to pay. We have a little bit of tough fatherly love here, and here are some height puns, as Longpole is drawn as this really tall, lanky young man who easily dwarfs his peers, and then we have his father who is literally twice as tall as Speedy, berating his currently preoccupied son, mentioning how he has always told him to stay away from water until he grows up a little bit, as he straight up towers over Speedy, promising his precious offspring a remarkable beating to remind him of his lessons, while this spectacle of a duo is on their way. Mirek and Yarka miraculously manage to pull Longpole Jr. from the abyss, the shallow waters that would barely reach his thighs if he were in his right mind. His first concern after his reemergence is who had tripped him, who had kicked the crate from underneath him, which then resulted in his involuntary bath. Obviously, it was no one, but it is always easier to blame someone else. There is also Bohosh, who is interrogating the undrowned Longpole about the distinct lack of goldfishes in his hands. Well, he was already there. Could have brought a few out with him. Then the father arrives, firmly holding onto his profligate son, praises the rapid arrows for the brisk rescue, even ends up offering them a reward. Technically, this one, a 30 minutes of playtime with the family dog. And that is the end of the chapter and of this video as well. We shall see what the next one brings with it.